Welcome to Zoe Stories. My girlfriend's ultimate revenge. She feminized me forever. James Blake had always been a man of contradictions. On the surface, he lived a life most would envy. Successful at work, charming, and in a steady relationship with Emma, a woman he had been with for nearly 2 years. But beneath the polished exterior, James harbored a secret, one that had become both his obsession and his guilt.
He was a crossdresser.
It wasn't something he'd planned to become or even admitted to himself until much later in life. It had started as an innocent curiosity, a fascination with the soft textures of his girlfriend's clothes, the delicate makeup she wore, and the elegant ways she carried herself. But over time, that curiosity evolved into something more. The act of crossdressing gave him a feeling of release, of stepping into someone else's shoes and becoming someone different, someone more confident and less weighed down by the expectations of his male identity. But James never thought he would be caught. Not by Emma, not by anyone. He had built his life in a way that kept his secret buried, even though it ate at him each day. He was careful. No one, not even Emma, knew about his late-night indulgences. He would dress up in the privacy of their shared apartment when she was away, slipping into her clothes, applying makeup, and slipping into a persona he never dared fully embrace. He loved the way it made him feel, free, beautiful, and unapologetically feminine. The story begins on a rainy Tuesday afternoon. The apartment James shared with Emma was quiet. She had gone to visit her parents for the weekend, leaving him alone in their spacious one-bedroom apartment in the heart of the city. The rain pattered gently against the windows, a soft hum that filled the room with an oddly peaceful atmosphere. It was the perfect setting for James to indulge in his secret. He could feel the familiar anticipation building up inside him as he set his things down at the door. Today felt different, though. Today felt like a turning point. James glanced over at the closet, his heart beating faster. The thought of slipping into Emma's wardrobe, to see himself in a reflection that felt more authentic than anything his usual attire could provide, was a temptation too strong to resist. He had done it many times before, wearing her dresses, her skirts, her heels. But today, something inside him was restless. There was a voice in the back of his mind urging him to do more, to transform fully, to lose himself in the process. He had been feeling the need to do something bigger, something bold. As the rain continued to fall outside, James took a deep breath. It was just him, his reflection, and the clothes. His fingers trembled slightly as he walked toward the closet, pulled out a long black dress that Emma had bought for a party months ago. The dress shimmered in the soft light filtering through the blinds. He could already picture himself in it, how the fabric would hug his body, how the heels would make him stand taller, and how his face would look when he painted on a layer of makeup. But just as he was about to unzip the dress, his phone buzzed. It was a message from Emma. "Hey babe, I might be home earlier than planned. Everything okay?" James froze. His heart skipped a beat, a rush of panic coursing through his veins. Emma wasn't supposed to be back until late tonight. This was supposed to be his time, his private moment to let go and embrace the feminine side he so desperately longed to explore. For a split second, he debated canceling everything, shoving the dress back into the closet, and pretending like nothing ever happened. But then, a feeling settled over him, one that felt like a dare, a challenge. The thought of Emma catching him, seeing him dressed as her, flashed in his mind. It was terrifying, yet it also sparked something deep inside him. A sense of freedom, excitement, and an unexplainable need to push the boundaries. James quickly typed a reply. "All good. Just finishing up some work." He didn't want to lie, but he couldn't help it. He wasn't ready to tell her. Not yet. James had always known Emma was the one. She was kind, confident, and beautiful, and she had always supported him through everything, even his quirks and eccentricities. She was the kind of girlfriend who would cook his favorite meal after a rough day at work, the kind who would laugh with him over silly inside jokes, and the kind who always seemed to know exactly what he needed. But there was one thing Emma didn't know about James: his secret crossdressing. They'd never discussed it. In fact, the topic had never even come up. It wasn't that James was ashamed of Emma, but rather that he feared how she would react. The few times he'd thought about confessing, he imagined 1,000 different scenarios, all of them ending in rejection. How could she possibly understand? The fear of losing her had always kept him quiet. But now, with Emma's message lingering in his mind, James felt a rush of conflicting emotions. He wanted to be honest with her, to share this side of himself. But he also feared what would happen if he did. What if she didn't accept it? What if she judged him? What if she thought he wasn't the man she thought he was? The internal conflict bubbled up inside him as he carefully slid the dress on and began applying the makeup. A sense of guilt and shame washed over him, but so did a sense of freedom. The moment was fleeting, and he knew it would only be a matter of time before Emma would return, but for now, he wanted to live in this fantasy just a little longer. As the minutes ticked by, James moved quicker, applying makeup with shaky hands, the brush strokes becoming more hurried as the anticipation built inside him. It was exhilarating, but his anxiety grew with every second. What if Emma walked in and caught him in the middle of this transformation? What if she saw him as something less than her boyfriend, someone unworthy of her love? Would she still look at him the same way? Would she still love him? As James finished applying his lipstick, he stood in front of the full-length mirror, staring at his reflection. His heart raced. He barely recognized the person staring back at him. The makeup had done its job. His jawline softened, his eyes larger and more defined, his lips full and red. The dress clung to his body in a way that made him feel powerful yet vulnerable. He was no longer just James. He was someone else entirely, a woman, a stranger in his own body. And yet, the feeling of freedom that washed over him made it all feel so right. But as his phone buzzed again, reality hit him like a ton of bricks. Emma was on her way back. James had only a few minutes before she would walk through that door. The excitement quickly morphed into fear, and the weight of his secret grew heavier. He was in deeper than he had ever been before, and the stakes had never been higher. James stood in front of the mirror, the weight of his own reflection pulling at him in ways he couldn't explain. Every detail of the transformation, the makeup, the dress, the heels, felt like an escape and a prison all at once. There was a sense of euphoria, a rush that coursed through him as he admired the woman in the mirror. His figure had changed, the soft contour of the dress accentuating curves he'd never known existed, his lips a bold red that stood out against his fair skin. He looked beautiful, almost unrecognizable from the man he usually was. But beneath that surface beauty was a storm of emotions, each one threatening to pull him apart. He wasn't just admiring a new version of himself. He was running from something, a deep, unsettling fear that came with the weight of keeping such a huge secret from Emma. The secret that, at any moment, could tear apart the life they had built together. His mind was racing as he stood there, his fingers absent-mindedly brushing over the soft fabric of the dress. The more he thought about Emma's impending return, the more his stomach churned. What if she walked in? What if she came back early and caught him in the act? What would he say? How would he explain himself? The mere thought of Emma's disappointed face, her eyes flickering with confusion and hurt, made his heart sink. He had always told himself that crossdressing was just a personal indulgence, a fleeting fantasy that allowed him to escape the rigid boundaries of his male identity. But now, standing here, fully transformed, he realized that it had become more than just an escape. It was a part of who he was, someone who longed for the freedom to express themselves fully, without fear or shame. He didn't want to be ashamed of this side of himself anymore. Yet, the stakes were higher than ever before. The excitement that had once been a source of joy now felt like a double-edged sword. His transformation had always been thrilling, but now it felt like a time bomb, ticking down to the moment when Emma would find out. And once she knew, everything would change. Could he live with that? Could he live with the possibility of losing her forever because of this hidden part of him? He glanced at the clock on the wall, its ticking seeming louder than ever. The minutes were slipping by, each one bringing him closer to the inevitable confrontation. Emma would be home soon. He could hear the faint sound of her footsteps approaching, the familiar click of her heels that always made his heart race. The sound was a constant reminder of how little time he had left. Despite the fear gnawing at his insides, there was a part of him that didn't want to let go of this transformation. There was something intoxicating about the way he felt in this dress, powerful yet vulnerable, confident yet fragile. He felt alive in a way that he never did in his usual male persona. The woman he saw in the mirror was confident, poised, and unapologetically herself. James, on the other hand, always felt like he was pretending, playing a part in a world that demanded him to be something he wasn't. For so long, he had hidden this side of himself, thinking it was something to be ashamed of, a guilty pleasure that he could never share with anyone. But now, as he looked at himself in the mirror, dressed in Emma's clothes, he felt a strange sense of liberation. He wasn't just dressing up. He was becoming someone else, someone more authentic. He had always known that there was a woman inside him, a part of him that had been suppressed for years, buried beneath layers of male expectations. He took a deep breath, his chest rising and falling with a mix of exhilaration and dread. Was this who he was meant to be? Was this the person he could finally embrace? Or was he just hiding from the truth, trying to escape from the life he had built with Emma? His fingers trembled as he adjusted the dress, pulling it down to make sure it fit perfectly. The fabric hugged his body in all the right places, and for a moment, he felt like the woman he had always dreamed of being. But the fear quickly crept back in. What would Emma think? Would she understand? Could she accept him as he was? Or would she see him as a stranger? Suddenly, his phone buzzed again, breaking him from his thoughts. It was a message from Emma. Almost home. Can't wait to see you. James felt a cold rush of panic flood over him. She was only a few minutes away, and he was still fully dressed, still living this fantasy that felt more real with every passing second. He could hear the sound of her car pulling into the driveway, the engine rumbling as it came to a stop. His heart was pounding in his chest, and for a moment, he couldn't move. The thought of being caught, of having everything exposed, was overwhelming. He stood there, paralyzed by fear, unable to tear himself away from the mirror. In the silence of the apartment, the tension seemed to stretch and grow, like a thick fog that hung in the air. His mind raced with 1,000 different scenarios, each one worse than the last. What would happen if Emma found out? Would she scream? Cry? Would she leave him? He had always been the perfect boyfriend, at least in Emma's eyes, but now, he wasn't so sure. Could he risk it? Could he risk telling her the truth? Or was it better to keep hiding, to continue living this lie? But just as quickly as the fear surged, something inside James clicked. He wasn't just afraid of being caught. He was afraid of being exposed. He had kept this secret for so long, hidden behind the facade of his male identity, that the thought of letting anyone see the real him, especially Emma, felt impossible. How could he explain this side of himself? How could he possibly make Emma understand that crossdressing wasn't just a phase, but a deep part of who he was? He took another step forward, his heels clicking sharply on the hardwood floor. The sound was deafening in the silence, amplifying the fear that threatened to swallow him whole. Every second felt like an eternity. He had no more time to think. The doorbell rang, and James froze, his blood turning to ice in his veins. James looked toward the door, his breathing shallow. His fingers gripped the dress, pulling it tightly against his body as if somehow trying to shield himself from what was about to happen. There was no more avoiding it. No more time to change back into his normal clothes. No more time to hide. The doorbell rang again, this time louder, more insistent. Emma was standing on the other side of the door, waiting for him. She had no idea what was about to unfold. She had no idea that her boyfriend, her seemingly perfect boyfriend, was standing there, transformed, dressed as a woman. And for the first time, James realized that there was no going back. He couldn't undo what he had done. The lie was too big now. James's heart raced as the doorbell rang again. This time, it didn't just signal the arrival of Emma. It marked the beginning of the end for the carefully constructed world James had built around his secret. He could hear the faint sound of her voice as she called out from the hallway, asking if he was there. Her excitement was palpable, unaware of the chaos that had consumed him in the past hour. The room felt suffocating now. The dress, which once felt so empowering, now clung to his body like a suffocating reminder of his indecision. He wasn't sure if he was ready for this, if he could handle the fallout. Everything about this moment felt like a ticking time bomb. The doorbell rang again, louder this time, and James froze. His entire body tensed, and for a moment, it felt like the world had stopped moving. "James?" Emma called again, a little louder this time. "You there?" "I'm home." Her voice, normally a source of comfort, now sent a jolt of panic through him. The weight of the situation crashed down on him in waves. He looked around frantically, wondering if he could somehow escape the inevitable. But there was nowhere to go. He was trapped in his own lie. The clock was ticking, the moment of confrontation drawing closer. His breath hitched as he heard her footsteps nearing the door, the unmistakable sound of heels clicking against the hardwood floor. His mind raced with 1,000 different thoughts. What would she say? What would she do? Could he possibly salvage the situation? Or was this the moment everything unraveled? Suddenly, there was a knock on the door, followed by a soft, "James, can I come in?" James's chest tightened. His throat felt dry. He was paralyzed by fear, unable to move or even speak. He could feel the sweat on his palms, his pulse quickening. There was no going back now. The truth was right outside the door, just beyond his reach. The woman he loved was about to step into the room, and everything was about to change. With one final deep breath, James forced himself to approach the door. His heels clicked softly as he took slow, deliberate steps toward the handle. Every inch felt like an eternity. He opened the door a crack, just enough to see Emma standing there, smiling brightly, holding a shopping bag in one hand. Her expression faltered when she saw him standing there, dressed in a tight-fitting dress, makeup perfectly applied, and hair styled in waves. For a moment, time seemed to slow down. Emma's eyes widened, a flash of confusion and disbelief flickering across her face. She didn't speak. She didn't move. It was as if the world had stopped turning, and there was only the two of them, suspended in a moment of uncertainty. James swallowed hard, trying to find his voice. He could feel his knees weakening under the weight of Emma's gaze. He had always feared this moment, but now that it was here, he wasn't sure how to navigate it. "Emma," James finally said, his voice trembling. I can explain." Emma blinked, her expression unreadable. She took a cautious step forward, her eyes scanning him from head to toe. Her lips parted, but no words came out at first. She seemed to be processing what she was seeing. Her boyfriend, the man she had been in a relationship with for so long, was standing before her, fully transformed into a woman. Emma began, but her voice trailed off as she looked down at the shopping bag she was holding, then back up at James. "What is this?" "James, what's going on?" James's heart pounded as he struggled to find the right words. He opened his mouth, but the words didn't come. This wasn't how he had imagined this conversation going. In his mind, he had always imagined Emma would be understanding, compassionate, but now, faced with the reality of the situation, everything felt different. The weight of the unknown hung heavy in the air. James started again, his voice barely above a whisper. "I've been keeping this from you. I've been dressing like this for a while. It's something I've always wanted to do, but I never thought I could tell you. I didn't think you would understand." Emma remained silent, her gaze fixed on him. The silence stretched between them, thick and heavy. James could see the flicker of emotions crossing Emma's face, shock, confusion, hurt, but beneath it all, there was something deeper, something darker. A flicker of suspicion? Anger? After what felt like an eternity, Emma spoke, her voice soft but firm. "You've been hiding this from me? For how long?" James could feel the heat rising in his cheeks, the shame creeping up his neck. He had never felt more exposed in his life. "A few months," he confessed, his voice shaking. "Maybe longer. I never meant to hurt you. I just didn't know how to tell you. I thought you'd—" Emma cut him off, her tone sharper now. "You thought I'd what? Leave you? You thought I'd think you were a freak?" James flinched at her words. He hadn't meant to hurt her, but now he realized how his secret had betrayed her trust. "No, I just didn't want to lose you," he said quietly. "I thought if you knew the truth, you wouldn't love me anymore." Emma took a deep breath, her expression softening slightly. She looked at him for a long moment, her eyes searching his face, as if trying to understand. Then, her gaze shifted downward, her eyes lingering on the dress, the heels, the makeup. "I don't know what to say," she admitted, her voice low and conflicted. "I don't know what this means for us, James." The tension in the room was unbearable. James could feel his body trembling, the weight of the conversation pressing down on him like a suffocating cloud. He had never been so exposed, so vulnerable. But Emma's next words would be the ones that would decide everything. She could either walk away or stay and try to understand him, to try to work through the confusion and the hurt. "What happens now?" Emma asked, her voice quiet, almost uncertain. James swallowed hard. He had no answers, no easy way to fix this. He had no idea what the future held, but for the first time, he felt like he had to take a step forward into the unknown. "I don't know," he said honestly. "But I know I can't hide this anymore. It's a part of who I am. I can't pretend it's not." There was a long pause before Emma spoke again. She looked down at her feet, lost in thought, as if considering her next move. Then, she looked back up at James, her expression hardening. "I'm going to need time to think about this," she said slowly. "You've changed everything, James. Everything. But I need time to process it. I need to figure out if I can accept this." James's heart sank at her words, but he knew she was right. The foundation of their relationship had been shaken to its core. There was no going back. Whatever came next, it would be a new chapter, one that neither of them could predict. As Emma stepped back, her face a mixture of confusion and determination, the door clicked shut behind her. James stood there, feeling more alone than he ever had in his life. He could hear the distant hum of traffic outside, but everything else felt eerily silent. He didn't know what would happen next. He didn't know if Emma would come back or if she would walk away forever. But as the clock ticked in the background, James knew one thing for sure. His life had just changed forever. The following days felt like an eternity to James. Every moment stretched into hours, and every hour felt like a lifetime. Since that night, when Emma had walked out of his apartment, he hadn't heard from her. No calls, no texts, no messages. Just silence. The emptiness of it was suffocating, like a heavy weight pressing down on his chest, leaving him breathless. Each time his phone buzzed, his heart leaped in his throat, only to sink in disappointment when it wasn't Emma. His mind raced, replaying that moment over and over again, the look on her face when she saw him dressed in women's clothing. The confusion, the shock, the hurt. Would she ever forgive him? Could their relationship survive this? He spent his days going through the motions, work, errands, and empty conversations with coworkers who didn't know the truth. But at night, when the world was quiet, the loneliness crept in. He stared at his reflection in the mirror, wondering if he would ever see the same version of himself again. Was he still the same person he had been before? Was he the man Emma had fallen in love with? Or had that person vanished along with the lies he'd been telling himself for so long? But as much as he wanted to reach out to Emma, to apologize, to fix everything, he couldn't shake the fear that it might be too late. What if she didn't want to come back? What if this was the end? Then, one evening, a knock on his door broke the silence. James's heart skipped a beat as he rushed to answer, his breath caught in his throat. He opened the door to find Emma standing there, her eyes tired but determined. She was holding a small bag, the same shopping bag she had been carrying that day when she first walked in on him. She looked at him for a long moment, her gaze unreadable. "Can we talk?" she asked quietly, her voice calm but with an undercurrent of emotion that James couldn't quite place. James's breath escaped in a shaky sigh. He stepped aside to let her in, his mind racing. "Of course. I've been waiting for you to come back." Emma nodded and walked in, setting the bag down on the kitchen counter. She didn't immediately look at him, but James could see the tension in her shoulders, the way she was holding herself together. This wasn't going to be easy. He could feel it in the air, Everything was about to be decided. As Emma sat down on the couch, James took a seat across from her, his hands trembling slightly. He had no idea what to say, how to fix this. All he knew was that this conversation would change everything. There was no going back from this point. After a long pause, Emma finally spoke. "I've been thinking a lot about what happened. About you and me and everything." Her voice was soft but steady. "I won't lie, I was shocked. I didn't expect it. And I was hurt, James. You kept this from me for so long, and I felt betrayed. But then I realized that what you do, who you are, it's not just something that affects me. It's your life. And I can't control that." James's heart pounded in his chest as he listened to her words, but there was a strange sense of relief building inside him. It wasn't over. She was still here. And maybe, just maybe, there was hope. Emma continued. "I've had to ask myself a lot of tough questions. Do I accept this? Do I understand it? Do I love you for who you are, not who I thought you were? And the truth is, I don't know yet. I don't have all the answers. But I do know one thing. I'm not walking away from this. Not yet." James blinked, stunned. "What do you mean?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. "I mean that I'm willing to try, James. I'm willing to learn. To understand why this is important to you. I'm not going to pretend it's going to be easy, but I'm not going to abandon you because of something I don't understand." Emma's eyes softened as she looked at him, the tension in her face easing. "I don't want to lose you either. But I need time. I need space to process all of this." James felt a weight lift off his shoulders, but it was quickly replaced with a sense of uncertainty. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, and there were still so many unanswered questions. But for the first time in days, he felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe things could be okay. Maybe they could rebuild what they had lost. "I don't want to rush you," James said quietly. I want you to know that I'm not asking you to accept this all at once. It's a part of me, but I don't expect you to understand it all right now." Emma nodded slowly. "I know. And I'm not asking you to change. I just need to know that we can work through this together on our terms." James took a deep breath and smiled, a small but genuine smile. "We'll figure it out. We'll take it one step at a time." As they sat together on the couch, the tension between them began to ease. There was still a long road ahead, but for the first time in a while, James felt a sense of peace. Emma hadn't walked away. She hadn't given up on him. And maybe, just maybe, there was a chance for them to find a new path forward. The scene shifted. James sat alone in the same room, looking at the dress hanging in the corner. It was a symbol of everything he had hidden, everything he had struggled to accept. But now, as the days passed, he knew it wasn't just about the clothes, the makeup, or the transformation. It was about understanding who he truly was and finding someone who could love him for that. But as the camera panned out, the screen slowly faded to black. The story was far from over. The future was uncertain. Would Emma truly accept him in the end? Could their relationship survive this new dynamic, or would the strain be too much? What would James discover about himself along the way? The answers would come in time. But for now, the journey had only just begun.